Derelict yet famous. Empty but iconic. 5 abandoned sites ingrained in Hollywood history. From the hauntingly familiar.
When you see this landscape, you get a sense of deja vu, like you've seen this before.
To ghost towns that make perfect backdrops for fantastical tales.
Hollywood was scouting for a location for a new movie they were making. They found this amazing village forgotten by time.
Long forgotten ruins given new life by the silver screen.
It was scheduled for demolition, but just before that, a film crew came to shoot a movie that, of course, has become world famous.
And the real places that inspired summer blockbusters.
This ridge is related to one of the most iconic stories in US history. It was made for the silver screen.
These are 5 of cinema's most iconic abandoned places. Decaying relics. Ruins of lost worlds. Sites haunted by the past. Their secrets waiting to be revealed. In Tunisia, on the edge of the Sahara Desert, a curious structure emerges from shifting sands.
When you first see this landscape, it's very alien, very barren, but also there's something familiar about it. You get a sense of deja vu, like you've seen this before.
It looks like it could have been there 200 years or indeed 2,000 years. You just can't tell looking at it from a distance.
Closer inspection reveals menacing features.
The people who built this obviously had a lot to be afraid of and a lot to protect.
This high exterior wall is clearly there to protect the settlement, but from whom?
What links this place to another complex marooned 175 miles away, across the largest salt pan in the Sahara?
There's no one here. The sand has been pushed up against the structures. It's been abandoned for some time.
They seem really out of place, as if they were dropped out of an airplane into here, the middle of nowhere.
Fantastical events a long time ago connect both sites. But this place is far and away different to the first.
Here you see something that at first looks ancient, but you quickly realize it isn't. This is something built more recently, but it's entered into our collective imagination as if it's a real place.
You start to realize that these are not all permanent structures. What's really going on here? Where did these things come from?
And what out-of-this-world force made both these sites world famous and gave Hollywood's favorite intergalactic hero a place to call home? This multi-celled construction is Hacksaw Ridge Sultan. Dr. Ali Thabti is an expert on these strange abandoned structures.
The Hacksaw was protected from anything that lay outside because there was only one entrance. There was no other way of penetrating it other than through this gate, called a skiffer.
Dating from the 16th century, Hacksaw Ridge Sultan is a fortified village which straddles an ancient Saharan trade route.
Most people of this region were engaged in trade, either directly or indirectly. Slaves, precious metals, ivory, and other products were all being imported from neighboring Sudan.
The semi-nomadic culture who built this place were called the Berbers.
The Berber people have occupied this region since Roman times, and it's they that brought this distinct style of building.
And here we've got lots of these little dome structures, very defensive, very small, but clearly important.
Each cell was known as a gorfa, and it would hold the food reserves for a particular family. For centuries, they would use that to protect their grain and their olives.
This is your insurance policy. This is your bank.
They had to get through dry seasons, and they had to keep outsiders from stealing their food. That would be a death sentence.
While its walls offered protection from raiders, the secret to the gorfa cell's success was their rounded roofs which deflect the sun.
Because the temperature never goes above 17 or 18 degrees, these rooms preserve food products stored in them. So, for instance, barley can be kept here for 5, 6, or even 7 years without anything happening to it.
For centuries, these domes helped protect the Berbers from the cruel conditions of the Sahara. Then, in 1976, their otherworldly shape inspired the realization of a very different desert world at another neglected site almost 200 miles away. It's a link that only begins to make sense when a distinctive domed structure comes into view.
In this seemingly never-ending desert, it looks tiny and insignificant, but it is immediately recognizable.
It's quite obvious this is Luke Skywalker's childhood home.
Now you know where you are. The scenes at the Lars homestead really set the tone for Star Wars, for the original Star Wars.
In 1976, director George Lucas brought Hollywood to this remote corner of Tunisia. Inspired by the domed architecture of the ancient Berber grain store, Lucas built a set here, and the sandy landscape became Luke Skywalker's home planet of Tatooine.
It's that iconic. I am surprised that there aren't two suns on the horizon. It's so burnt into our brains that you expect Luke Skywalker or his aunt or uncle to come round the corner.
This is where it all started. The original movie set of the first Star Wars film, A New Hope. I mean, you stand and you look at it, and just for a moment, you're transported to a galaxy far, far away.
Initially, they went to Tunisia because it was a cost-effective location with the deserts they wanted. But then Tunisia and its culture and architecture started influencing the movies.
The Tunisian landscape seemed a dream fit for Lucas's vision, but the brutal desert climate would be unforgiving.
So, key date, March the 22nd, 1976. George Lucas shouts action out here in Tunisia, and it hasn't rained in 7 years to this point. And then what do you know it? The rains come down for the next 4 days.
A storm rolled in, and it wreaked havoc on the set. In fact, the top of the Lars homestead was blown right off. And the model they were using for the Jawa's ship, the sand crawler, was almost destroyed.
Everything is just being washed away. What a way to start this whole universe.
Production continued, and Star Wars became a celluloid sensation, although few expected George Lucas to return to Tunisia.
So the sets were just left to the environment and left to rot.
But Tunisia's unique architecture proved too much of a draw, and Lucas did come back. This time, the ancient grain store at Qasr Ulid Sultan took center stage.
They actually used the Gorfas as a set, as a location for the Phantom Menace, and these cells that were once used for food storage became used as prison cells where Anakin and his mother are imprisoned in the Phantom Menace.
The ancient walls made a perfect intergalactic prison, but Lucas wanted more from the barren Tunisian landscape. And in 1998, he decided to build his own desert site, almost 200 miles away in the remote Nafta region.
Mos Espa is an entirely invented place. It was built as a set in the middle of nowhere when they shot The Phantom Menace.
Hamida Shebi worked on the film.
During filming, there were lots of people here, around 250. The technical team were 120, and on top of that, there were all the actors and so on. Sometimes there were 300 people on set. It was a big job.
Familiar landmarks of the fictional town have withstood weather and time, including the spaceport gate, pod racing area, and Watto's shop. Moisture evaporators and other props also remain, posing a stark contrast to the sandy desert landscape.
They spent nearly a whole year building this set. It was a big undertaking. First of all, they scouted in May, June, and July. After that, it was punishing building this set in the desert. We would start work at 4 or even 3 in the morning and finish at 10 or 11 at night. They were long days. The shoot went on for 3 more months. Then it was all over. It was like a dream.
The movie making may have finished many years ago, but Star Wars has become intrinsically linked to Tunisia.
They left these great sets, which have now become tourist attractions in the desert.
Star Wars really changed this part of Tunisia. It really put it on the map. It's become a place of pilgrimage for Star Wars fans.
I'm so happy to have been part of making the film. It gave an economic boost to the region and created jobs so that many people could earn money. It was extraordinary.
Today, as the shifting desert sands threaten to engulf the Star Wars sets in Nafta, Qasr Ouled Sultan still stands resolute. Perched here for over 500 years, it is testament to its builders' skill and ingenuity.
In some ways, the Star Wars stories are stories of a struggle against the odds. And that mirrors the story of the Berbers, who only survived in this harsh landscape by banding together and cooperating against a desert that was really encroaching upon them on every side.
In Ohio, near the city of Mansfield, stands a haunting facility, saved from destruction by a remarkable Hollywood connection.
The same day that the wrecking balls came to tear this place down was the same day that the filming company showed up.
But no matter what Hollywood dreamt up, it could never compete with the real story. This building's origins stretch back to the late 19th century.
This site at Mansfield was chosen in 1885 for a very special reason and a very particular project: to take young offenders and rehabilitate and re-educate them in the most positive way possible.
It was a reformatory. So the notion was you weren't just punishing people, you were helping them learn, and then you would release them out in the world and they would commit crimes no more.
This is the Ohio State Reformatory, completed in 1911. Inside, expert Ron Puff finds evidence that shows how the idealistic reformatory soon became a crowded adult facility.
We're currently in the West Cell Block. This has 5 tiers, originally 350 cells, meant for 1 inmate to a cell. Ended up from the very beginning with 2 inmates, so we house 700 inmates here.
You could be stabbed, you could be mugged, you could be thrown off a high walkway. I mean, the place was such that you were in fear of your life each and every day.
Inmates were told, when you came here, make yourself a weapon and hide it in the backyard. So if everything goes crazy, you at least know where your shank or your rock or whatever it is you placed is, so you can be safe.
By the 1930s, the Ohio State Reformatory had become a brutal adult prison.
For the worst offenders, there was solitary confinement here at the reformatory. They might keep the lights on 24 hours a day. They might keep the lights off 24 hours a day.
The hole, as it was known, was crammed full of prisoners.
In one case, they had a riot, and they wound up putting 120 prisoners down in the hole at the same time for 30 days.
In this instance, they actually found a body that had been murdered and stuffed into a mattress for several days before anyone realized he was dead.
By the time this facility was abandoned in 1990, of the 150,000 inmates who arrived here, 200 never left. Today, this grand facility has become a major tourist attraction, thanks to an extraordinary twist of fate.
It was scheduled for demolition, but just before that, a film crew came to shoot a movie that, of course, has become world famous, The Shawshank Redemption.
The prison drama starring Morgan Freeman and Tim Robbins made the most of this inhospitable setting.
One of the things we're famous for is the movie The Shawshank Redemption. Now, that was filmed back here in 1993, and we're so thankful it happened here because now we have this building to show people because of it.
The Shawshank Redemption was the redemption of this prison.
In rural North Carolina, an industrial ghost town doubled for a cinematic dystopia.
You see house after house that looks as though it hasn't been lived in ever.
The houses are laid out according to some sort of plan. The houses look mostly identical.
And then you've got a smattering of commercial buildings and a shop. It's a community, but it's suddenly frozen in time.
There's little to suggest why this village is here.
This is a land of rocky peaks, dark hollows, steep river valleys. It's not a place known for rich agriculture. What would have brought people to a place like this?
Could traces of manufacturing next to the nearby river offer up a clue?
Whatever happened to make everyone here move away had to have been worse than living in one of the poorest corners of America.
This place might have been totally forgotten, just a backwater that no one remembers, if it hadn't played a major role in one of the largest Hollywood blockbuster series ever.
Calvin Reyes spent 3 years preserving this dilapidated place.
It's really great to be able to connect people with something that's, more pop culture and show them a little bit of piece of history that they can then fall in love with.
The structures here tell a sorry tale of abject poverty.
This is a typical floor plan. So you have 4 rooms in the bottom, separated by a main wall. And so originally, you have 2 families living in this house. The last residents were early 2000s, which is still hard for people to really believe because there was no running water at that point. There's no sewer. It was a tough life.
Former residents Susie Childers and Rick Hames used to call these simple structures home.
It's my house.
This is the house.
It's where we grew up.
Yeah. I used to throw a baseball against these steps for hours, and quite a few of those balls found the windows. So, in that regard, it looked kind of normal.
It looked good then. It looks sad now. Very sad.
This faded and battered village is called Henry River. In 2011, its run-down appearance attracted Hollywood.
When the producers of The Hunger Games were looking for a place that looked rural and impoverished, but still livable, Henry River turned out to be the perfect place.
This village wasn't built for the movie. This village was built 106 years before the movie was actually filmed. They were looking for a dystopian environment, which clearly we have, in an abandoned village.
This site was used to depict the grim, futuristic hometown of the Hunger Games' main character, Katniss Everdeen.
It's absolutely perfect. It's perfect for District 12. It's perfect for Katniss and her family to live in because it's the real deal. Generations of people have lived and worked here and brought up their own families.
Thanks to the movie, millions now know this village as District 12. But the real story of this isolated village is altogether different.
There has to be something that makes it economically feasible and logical for all these people to congregate in this pretty remote location.
Geography is the reason that this town is here. You've got a very steep valley with a lovely river flowing through it.
A 100-year-old dam at the edge of the settlement demonstrates the importance of the river.
I'd say about 8 to 10 months of the year, they'd be able to run off of water power. The river was high enough and producing enough flow.
All this power was being used to manufacture an important commodity, cotton.
In U.S. history, famously, cotton was the backbone of the economy in the South.
That cotton was being shipped overseas to be made into cloth in Britain and France. But after the Civil War, after slavery ended, cotton was still being grown in the South, but the new idea was to build cotton mills.
In 1903, the Henry River Manufacturing Company bought 1,500 acres at this site and transformed it into a thriving cotton production center. The company erected 35 worker houses, a 2-story boarding house, a bridge, a brick company store, the power-producing dam, and the original 3-story brick mill building where the cotton yarn was produced.
Early on, when they first started operating in 1905, they were working with 4,000 spindles. Within a few years, though, they tripled that production. At any given time, they had, over 100 employees working in the mill.
This was your classic company town. Everything was owned by the company. They provided everything, which in a way is the image of the beneficent company that wants to make life good for its workers, but also tended to trap workers into staying in the town.
For some, mill work was their only choice.
My mom had a job in the mill. She thought this was the perfect spot to live.
I can remember listening to my mom talk. As with a lot of other families in that day and time, when they got to be a certain age and they were able to work, they had to work. So she went to work in the mill before she ever graduated from high school. Their entire lives were spent here.
Industrial accidents were common in busy cotton mills, and the Henry River Mill was no exception.
You have people, especially early on in production, that were coming straight off the farm. They're not used to working in a manufacturing environment, and here's these giant machines that they're working on that didn't have the same safety regulations that we have today. Injuries were normal. People would lose appendages, they'd lose fingers, they'd lose hands, they'd get crushed, they'd break bones. It's just part of life in a textile mill.
My mother was injured pretty significantly in the mill. She got her hand caught in one of the winding machines and had several surgeries.
The tough working life and poverty created a tight-knit community at Henry River. The epicenter of this neighborhood was the brick building that would double as District 12's bakery, the company store.
So this was the place where everything happened. This is where they centered around, not necessarily the mill. The mill was a means of making money and surviving. And this is where the community was built, around this central store.
But as the 20th century progressed, life here would take a turn for the worse. It closed in 1970, but the vast mill building was still fully intact.
In 1977, it was struck by lightning and burned to the ground by the next morning. You could see it for miles, the fireball, because it just completely went up and there was no saving it.
With the mill burnt to its very foundations, there was no chance of work for the people of the village, and they eventually dispersed. Today, the industrial heritage of Henry River Mill Village has been revived.
It's really neat to go back in time and see what some of these things look like, and you find everything. It's really incredible.
And the village has also been given a new kind of history.
I don't know if they actually filmed some at the house we lived in at the top of the hill. My daughter tells me now I lived in District 12.
Off the southwest coast of Japan is an obliterated and deserted island site. Once the thrilling backdrop for James Bond's bitter showdown in the movie Skyfall. A high wall surrounds the island. It's not clear what it was built to keep in or out. So what happened at this torn-out site? And what became of the 5,000 people who once lived here? This is Hashima Island. Former resident Tomoji Kabata remembers the first time he saw this place, known locally as Battleship Island.
When I saw the island from a ship for the first time, I noticed that it really looked like a battleship. Another thing I was surprised by was the sheer number of reinforced concrete buildings.
Derelict industrial structures reveal the true purpose of this site. Coal was first discovered here in the 19th century, and 4 deep shafts were sunk to extract it.
You're talking about digging a 200-meter deep mine in the sea next to this tiny little island. It's an incredible logistical challenge.
The deeper you go into the mine, the more material you're bringing up. And to use that to backfill and make your island slightly bigger to maybe then house more miners so you can go even deeper. It kind of keeps going round and round. Where does it stop?
By the 1970s, Hashima Island had tripled its natural size.
Reclaiming land is actually a massive engineering challenge because you're working with water which moves. The levels come up and down. It can be quite acidic, quite salty. It corrodes man-made materials quite easily.
Even so, it still became one of the most crowded places on Earth.
So the population density on Hashima got to the point where it was double what civic engineers at that time would have recommended as being the maximum.
9-story blocks accommodated the rapidly expanding population.
There were no elevators at all in these high-rise buildings, so people moved about horizontally. There were lots of passageways going across, so we didn't need to go downstairs at all to get from one building to another. We could just walk across using the passageways.
Productivity was high, despite punishing temperatures close to 40 degrees Celsius and 95% humidity. The working conditions here were brutal.
It was a really dangerous place. Stones often fell from the ceiling. It was like doing hard labor in a steam bath.
With coal deposits depleted, mining operations ceased in 1974 and the population left. Nearly 40 years later, Hashima Island became a site of industrial heritage and the perfect setting for James Bond to meet his match. The final site lies 1,000 miles from Tokyo on the Japanese island of Okinawa. A steep hillside conceals a strange blend of ruins.
We're looking across the water toward this rising ground, a dominating ridge, with some structures visible that look as though it's been reinforced, fortified perhaps.
Somebody has taken serious care to turn these hills into fortifications.
Descending into dense vegetation, beyond the warning signs, are entrances to another world.
Built into a mountain, you'd never even know this complex was here. It's pretty much impossible to access unless you were led inside.
I also see evidence of battle. I see shell fragments or bullet holes around.
It's interesting that in one of the chambers, you can still see text in Japanese that, when it's translated into English, reads, "Destroy America."
How did these underground facilities contribute to some of the bloodiest and most famous battles in history?
On this ridge are the remains of an important medieval castle, a site of spiritual significance. But to Americans, this ridge means something else entirely. This is related to one of the most iconic stories in US history.
Aki Miyazato has spent the last decade investigating what happened on this island.
So the writings in this wall says, "Destroy America." So this is the commander, Rear Admiral Otto's room. And he sent a telegram sent out to mainland Japan praising Okinawans. After that, on June 13th, 1945, he committed suicide in this room with his close officers.
What led to this moment is an extraordinary tale of bravery and self-sacrifice.
It is a remarkable and heroic story. You can see why it was picked up by Hollywood. It was made for the silver screen.
The 26th of April, 1945. The Maida Escarpment, also known as Hacksaw Ridge. Men of the US Army's 77th Infantry Division were waiting anxiously beneath the almost vertical 120-meter cliff. Part of Operation Iceberg, the largest amphibious assault in the Pacific theater of the Second World War.
The Navy's 5th Fleet and more than 180,000 US Army and US Marine Corps troops descended on this island for one final push.
Planners assumed that they would be resisted every step of the way. This was going to be Omaha Beach all over again.
At first, they encountered an eerie quiet. But the silence was soon shattered.
They used naval gunfire support to absolutely muller the place. They bashed Hacksaw Ridge so hard that nothing is going to be left alive on the surface.
US infantrymen clawed their way up ladders to the smoke-filled ridge above. But the enemy was nowhere to be seen.
But then once they get onto the cliff, the Japanese, who are invisible, can pop up and start blazing away.
Caught off guard, the troops were driven back by a hail of gunfire. Among them was Desmond Doss, a Seventh-day Adventist who refused to hold or fire a rifle.
Instead of joining the retreat back down to the beach, Doss continues to collect wounded up on this, fire-ravaged ridge top.
Not only does Doss rescue his own captain, but he also rescues 75 of his comrades. Doss isn't going to fight, but what Doss is going to do is save American lives as long as he possibly can.
Carrying them one by one to the edge of the escarpment, he lowered them by rope down the cliff face. Yet Doss's individual bravery couldn't mask his battalion's colossal losses.
When the US landed, they met almost no resistance. But that was the plan, to draw them in close and then emerge from this network of underground tunnels. This way, they could engage them in hand-to-hand combat.
They're retreating into these fortifications, forcing the Americans to dig them out, such as they had to do at Iwo Jima, and take tremendous casualties. So this, in turn, makes the American approach much more brutal. The Americans are forced to kind of pry them out of the rocks.
They're using the inherent strength of defensive warfare to their advantage. According to classic military theory, if you're going in against a well-prepared enemy in entrenched positions, you had better have a 6-to-1 advantage. Otherwise, it's not going to happen.
The Japanese were so outnumbered that every able-bodied Okinawan was drafted in. Schoolboys were used as frontline soldiers, and schoolgirls as nurses in makeshift underground hospitals. Scorched timber from American flamethrowers is testament to the horrors these children were exposed to. Once the Japanese positions beneath Hacksaw Ridge were destroyed, US forces moved south towards the strategically vital airfield at Naha. Here, they were confronted with another underground fortress, built into the hill overlooking the airport.
This place was meant to house a naval staff and a really serious communications capability.
So this is the signal room. There are several signal operators sending a message to mainland Japan, as well as military, Navy, receiving and sending, but decoding is done by a different room and different operators.
This is the former underground naval headquarters, nearly 500 meters of cavernous tunnels.
You had to have room for the admiral, the flag staff, broader staff, signalers, and thousands of Japanese soldiers to defend the place. It was built to be hard to crack, and it was built to last against a heavy American assault.
And it was about to be put to the test. The 6th Marine Division, having captured Naha Airport, encircled this bunker network.
The Navy couldn't fight back too much, and then only way they could do is with the spears, they went outside and ended up getting hit. They couldn't fight back anymore. They had to stay inside.
Yet the evidence suggests these tunnels may have seen combat.
In these dark underground caverns, you can't help but notice that some of the walls are covered in pockmarks and what look like bullet holes.
So did American forces manage to penetrate this formidable facility?
Admiral Ota saying that if this is the end of our operation and we are committing suicide, but you are free to go. It's hard to believe, a commander would not force the lower rank soldiers to commit suicide. So it's a very, very rare.
Once he had sent his final message, Admiral Ota took out his personal weapon and he shot himself in front of his staff. And from the holes in the wall, we can see that all of his staff, to a man, shot themselves afterwards. Japanese culture said it is better to die a suicide than to surrender, and Ota and his staff died heroes in the Japanese culture.
Short of guns, some officers had to improvise with grenades. Others were found with their throats cut. Many of the regular soldiers chose to stay and prepared to fight to the bitter end.
Instead of fighting for control of these tunnels, the Americans just detonate all the tunnel entrances, close them up with rubble.
And they waited a good long time to make sure that there would be no resistance when they went down there. When American forces did go into those tunnels, they found thousands of bodies of Japanese naval personnel.
The Battle of Okinawa was one of the bloodiest of the Second World War. 200,000 Japanese were killed, many of them civilians and children, 12,500 on the American side. In 1970, the former naval headquarters were converted into a museum, and in 2006, Desmond Doss's story was immortalized by the Hollywood film Hacksaw Ridge.
And that film brought it to the forefront of popular culture. Hacksaw Ridge is a film which is as anti-war as any war film gets, and it implants itself into the American consciousness at the same time that Iraq and Afghanistan are going badly wrong.
Having been shot and taking 17 pieces of shrapnel at Hacksaw Ridge, Desmond Doss was rewarded with the Medal of Honor for his selfless act there.
Hacksaw Ridge is actually a good story, isn't it? The soldier helped others, and we believe that both, Americans and Japanese Okinawans share the history together. And then what we do is pray for hope for the eternal peace.